Morning, everyone. Thanks for waiting around. It's a bit of a high-pressure situation, this first thing on a Monday morning, giving a talk about bloody front-end development, but we'll see how we get on. I'm Andy Bell, as you can see. I'm a designer and front-end developer. Been lucky enough to work with clients like Harley-Davidson, Sky, the NHS, and Oracle, where I've worked on some pretty monster projects. And because of that, I've developed some skills that allow me to do modular front-end development, and that's what I'm going to try and share with you today. So currently, I'm a designer for a product called WriteUp, which is a practice management software. So private practices, NHS practices, they manage all their patients, appointments, notes, assessments. And with that, we've got a desktop-based browser app, and then we've got a native iPhone app, which is using Cordova. So I don't know if many of you doing the web dev course will be using that. And also, we've just launched a responsive online booking system. So patients can book appointments, they get notifications, and it works any device that you can throw at it, I think. And yeah, so that's what I'm going to cite for a lot of this today, is that particular project. So one of the things that I use heavily to get some modularization on the go is SaSS. Now, I don't know if any of you have used SaSS before. If you have, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the top for anyone who hasn't used it yet. So basically, SaSS is very similar to CSS. It's actually an extension of CSS when you use the SaSS syntax. So you can write it almost identically. And what it allows you to do is use things like variables, functions like mixins and mathematic functions, and some like silent classes and modules, which will only run when you extend them within your components. So what SaSS does there, so you've got, say, cat.scss, and then that's compiled down with like node-based tools like Grunt or Gulp, or software like CodeKit on the Mac, or Prepros, which is Windows-based. And then what that produces at the end is a CSS file, which is read by the browser and rendered as usual. So I'm going to do a little quick example to show you. Here we're going to start with some vanilla CSS and HTML, which you all know, and then I'm going to move on to some SaSS, and then we'll introduce some BEM later on into the talk. So we're going to build this guy. It's a nice little lolcat. It's a really basic component. I've just got like a fixed width media component with a little image in there and a little caption, just to really show us all the tools that we have available to us. So it's this snippet of HTML. So as you can see in HTML5, we've got a figure with an image and a little caption that's crediting the greatest website on the planet, cheeseburger.com. I'd strongly recommend you go on that. And all I'm going to do is, to get that cat, the outer component looking like it does, stick a bit of border on it. I'm going fixed width for now. In the responsive world, you'd probably have it within a grid item. Flexbox is probably the most preferable choice for me these days. Or in the future, CSS grids as well, so they'll allow it to be fluid and responsive. But for now, I'm just doing 200 pixel wide. And then I'll style the image. I'm actually forcing it to be 100% wide, so it always fills the container. And then setting the height as auto. That'll keep the aspect ratio of the image going as well. And then just some classic fig caption styling, you know, italics, bit of gray, and a nice bit of padding on there. And then end up with this guy. So what I'm going to do now is introduce some SaSS into the mix. So first thing I mentioned about SaSS is you can use variables. Now all I've done here is I've set the two grey colors as variables, and I can access them from wherever I want within the SaSS. Now, the online booking project that I was talking about before, we've taken variables as far as we can take them, so everything is configurable via variables within the project. So the gut system for the grid, all the breakpoints, and everything is configured by variables. And the reason we've done that is if a new member of staff started, they could easily get a grasp of what the project was about just by looking within the variables section of it alone. I mean, this thing's over 50 components, so it's a huge project. So it requires that level of configurability. So what I've done here is, in the cat, I've just replaced that static reference to hex code with the gray. So if I change that gray now, it would cascade throughout the whole project. And the same with the border on that one. So it's really basic stuff, just to give you an idea. One thing that's really useful with SaSS, especially SCSS, is the ability to nest your selectors. So if I just quickly put this bit of CSS up, you see there you've got the cat, and you can stick the image and the fig caption within the actual module itself. And that will just compile back down to what we were expecting with the CSS. Just some people like to do it like that. Others, one thing to mention about nesting is that some people do take it a little bit too far, and you can end up with like 6 levels deep of specific CSS. And with big projects, it's really useful not to do specific CSS if you can help it. And then mixins. This is one way of creating some modularization with your code. So what you can do is you can abstract a bit of CSS away from the component itself and share it between other components by creating a little function. So very similar to other programming languages, you can create your little function, or mixin as it is there. You can pass parameters, as you can see at the top there. I'm passing a flag to determine whether or not it's to be italic. And then you can have a bit of logic in there as well. So I'm querying that it's italic flag and setting the font style accordingly. And then if I want to pull that in with my code, I just include it like that. And that means I can have that caption used across all sorts of different components. Again, it's worth noting with mixins that they'll dump that CSS everywhere that you write it. So you can end up with loads of repeated code if you're not careful. So they're to be used, responsibly. A good example in the real world, I use a mixin for all my media query stuff. So all the breakpoints, mobile up to desktop, have all got a key value to them. So palm, lap, and stuff like that. Then that means I can set the breakpoints with variables, and knowing that that mixin is always going to return back predictable breakpoints every time, instead of statically writing them within my CSS. Another thing that's really useful with SaSS that I'd really pull on is the ability to modularize. So what that means is I can have many different partials. So I've got, say, 3 SaSS files there, and then they'll be gathered in by main.scss, which then compiles into main CSS. So what it means is you can have as many SaSS partials as you like. So you can create really small partials, manageable partials, pull them all into one big file, or you can have a couple of big files, and they compile into a nice CSS file. Really useful stuff. So that's it for SaSS. So what I'm going to look at now is BEM. Now BEM's a methodology, and I'll quickly show you what it means. It means block element modifier. So what I try to do here is try to create human-readable markup classes. So back to online booking, we've got a massive amount of components. As you can imagine, that generates a lot of HTML. So if we mark up our elements like this, then anyone could come in and see what that element actually is and what its child elements and its dependencies are straight off the bat. So in this example here, we've got cat. As you saw there, we've got the cat, and then an element is illustrated with a double underscore, and then a modifier is a double dash. Again, so you can see just by looking at a double underscore that it's an element or a double dash. It's modifying the core module itself. So I'll implement that on our cat example. You'll notice here as well I'm putting little code pen links. I've just created like 3 little code pens so you can see the difference between each one. I'll get you put some slides to put something inside here. So go back to our little snippet of HTML, and you'll see the difference here now is I've still got a class of cat at the top, but I've actually put classes on all the other elements now as well. And that serves many purposes, but the main reason is that it's associated with the module itself. And then if I just quickly highlight each element, so you've got the block, which is the blue highlight, a modifier on there, which I've just stuck in. So I'm saying I want a large cat, and then 2 child elements in there, which are the actual elements. So 2 key things with BEM that I find really useful. Markup can be different from instance to instance. So I can have shared CSS module, but I can mark it up differently around the project. So for instance, with this snippet here, I've ripped all the semantic markup out, and I've gone for just classic divs and p tags. Now, obviously, you probably wouldn't do that in the real world, but just illustrates the point. And one thing I really do find it useful with is I like to create a headline component for main headings. So as you can see here, I've got a H2 and a H1, but they'll render exactly the same as each other because of the BEM module. And then it gives me a bit of hierarchy of headings then as well. And I could, if I really wanted to, I could actually mark that up with a div and it's still exactly the same. So it just creates a bit of flexibility and scalability with your markup. And then last one is there's a clear HTML partial to module relationship. So, you know, when you look at that snippet of HTML, that its associated file is cat.scss. So anyone can look at there. You've got tons of components. You see that snippet of HTML, you look in the SaSS area, and you find that module, and you know that everything's going to be contained within that module. Keeps a nice scalable code base. So let's put it in practice with a bit of SaSS as well. So my best friend in SaSS is the ampersand symbol. What the ampersand symbol does is it provides scope. So, for instance, in this context here, cat, and then the ampersand there is equal to cat. So if I put the ampersand into the caption element, it would equal cat underscore underscore caption. So what it allows you to do is to write CSS like that, rather than writing the selectors out every time. And again, if I wanted to change the module name to dog, all the selectors that are generated by the SaSS will suddenly become dog. So it just makes your code nice and flexible and readable as well, you know, when you've got big components. And then more importantly for me is that compiles down to that, which reduces specificity. So caption, although technically it's a dependency of cat, it doesn't have to be within cat to style itself. So if, you know, a junior developer came in and accidentally put it out of context, it wouldn't render crazy. It still looked pretty predictable. And it makes it a lot more accessible and friendly, the code base. And obviously, specificity reduction is always good. So lastly with BEM, I'm just going to put a modifier on there. So the cat large modifier that we were looking at before, I'm just setting it to be 500 pixel wide instead of 200 pixels. As you can see, I was putting it in there at the top, so that's going to cascade down. You can actually put a modifier wherever you want as well, so you could put a modifier on the caption if you like. Doesn't really matter. And then you end up with that much wider cat. Obviously, it makes a much smaller caption in context. And that's that really. So quick recap. So using SaSS can help us create small partials and modules compiled to a file. This helps create a manageable code base. And using BEM, we can expand on that by allowing us to write flexible markup with a clear path to modular or partial. And that's that. Thank you. Any questions?
Can you go a bit more to breakpoints?
What's that, sorry?
How do you define your breakpoints for different devices?
Right, okay, so what I have is I break all my variables into a directory, and within there I have a metrics one. So I tend to build mobile up. So any default CSS is the mobile CSS, and then I build up into desktop. So what I'll do then is I'll have key values. So generally I have Palm, which is mobile, which I tend to not use. Portable, which is bigger phones, portrait tablets. A lap, which is laptops and landscape tablets. And then desk, and desk wide, which is obviously like iMacs and such. And then my media query mixin pulls that key value and returns back the dimensions that I set for it in the variables. And then, yeah, just generates the breakpoint CSS, and then you stick whatever you want in there. So with the mixin, you don't have to return CSS. If you put @content inside the mixin, you can actually use the mixin like a function. So really useful. And obviously, I could change those breakpoints whenever I like, which I often do, just to, satisfy my pixel pushing needs. Yeah. Anyone else?
So those obviously are variables, those breakpoints are they in a separate file or are they?
Yeah, I tend to break everything up. My general project structure with SaSS is I'll have a layouts directory, which is top level layout. So if I've got, say, an e-commerce site is a good example. I've got a product view. All the layout will do is like the scaffolding. So it'll do like a grid layout and any sort of no styling whatsoever, just structure. And then I break everything into little components in, and they sit in their own directory, components, and they'll be like maximum 200 lines of code at the absolute worst. So really small and manageable. And then I'll have helpers, which is like little modules. So helpers are silent classes. So for instance, like headings, I'll set that as a helper, and then whenever I reference a heading anywhere in the SaSS, I extend that, so I can change that once and get it cascade throughout the project. So that's tend to what I do, and then I'll have vars, variables, in their own separate area as well. So it means that everything's just removed, and in source control environment as well, everything's traceable, so it just keeps everything nice. Anyone else?
Any questions? The conventions that you use there, the underscores and hyphens, is that something that's common in the web book?
It's something that a developer called Harry Roberts introduced a while ago. He's like a CSS consultant, as it were. And the whole point of it is that your markup becomes more readable and less dependent on itself as well. So, you know, the old way of doing things, you used to create these crazy long selectors and importantly citing actual HTML elements. And that means you had really rigid code bases. So the whole point is that if you flag up an element with a double underscore and a modifier is a double dash, A, it's really readable, and B, that you're removing all the markup dependency whatsoever on it. So when you look at like, you know, newer technologies such as React and stuff like that, it's a lot more scalable to work with those sort of things. So yeah, and it does, seriously, once you go BEM, you never go back. You know, it's really cool and really, really scalable, yeah.
And how long did it take you to get your head around it?
Initially, I was really resistant to it. I was introduced to it at an old agency that I worked at, and I really didn't like it. I didn't like SaSS either. I got introduced to them both at the same time, and I just thought, this is ridiculous. But once I got my head around it, I just couldn't, you know, I couldn't understand why I couldn't get my head around it. It's one of those things that once it clicks, you stick with it, and that's the only way you do things. I mean, I even build tiny little sites with BEM these days just because there's just no point in doing it any other way. So yeah.
Cool. All right.
Nice one.
Thank you.
No worries.